Folks, welcome back to the Anchor Podcast. We have with us today PhD Dr. Ann Brodeur. Ann is the Chair of Education and Liberal Arts at the Catholic Distance University. She received her doctorate in medieval history from the University of Toronto, her master's in medieval history from the Catholic University of America, and her bachelor's from Franciscan University. She also studied the Center of Medieval and Renaissance Studies at St. Michael's Hall in Oxford. For nearly 2 decades, she has taught graduate and undergraduate courses in Catholic Studies, History, and Education at the University of Toronto, the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul, and the University of Mary. She joined Catholic International, in 2024. Dr. Brodeur is a social historian of medieval Europe. Her scholarly interests concern the intersection of religion and culture, religious, social, and economic history, the history of philosophy of education, the family, and homeland. She has published and presented nationally and internationally on these topics and has been interviewed on Relevant Radio and Real Presence Radio. Dr. Brodeur has served on various boards and committees for K-12 institutions and universities and currently serves as advisor to Catholic K-12 schools around the country. Dr. Brodeur, thank you so much for coming on the Anchor Podcast. Great to see you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's great to be with you.
So we often love to kick off the Anchor Podcast just getting a sense of early education for our guests.
Okay.
What were you like when you think back about your first memories in school? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it painful? Were you a good student?
Yeah, so I grew up in Montana, and there were no private schools where I was in Montana. I grew up on a ranch, and it was like a 30-mile drive into school on the bus every day. And so I went to public schools all through, K-12. And, I guess I was a good school kid. I liked school. I liked learning. But I also came from a family that really loved reading. My mom would take us to the library with a laundry basket and we'd fill it up and bring it home. And so I just kind of naturally loved all of the reading, all of the learning that we did in school. And so I was the kind of kid that thrived in that sort of environment, loved it. Math was a struggle when I hit high school. But other than that, I really loved all of it.
So public high school K-12, public school
Yeah,
K-12, is that
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
then when did you begin to get this interest in medieval Europe? And where did this begin?
So I went to the Franciscan University of Steubenville for my undergraduate, and I majored in humanities and Catholic culture, and English literature. And one day, my one of my professors, Professor James Gaston, came to me and said, "Hey, how would you like to study at Oxford?" And I thought, that sounds cool. I've heard of it, but I was from Montana, and so it seemed like yeah, a little, yeah, out of my comfort zone for sure. So I went to study at St. Michael's Hall in the Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies when I was a senior in college, and that right
Wow.
there kind of ignited it. I thought this. So what I loved about it, um, the sense of history and the sense of tradition. I am really interested in culture, mainly because I grew up on a ranch, and then when I was in high school, we moved to the city, and the differences in culture and the differences in community and the experience of religion and community were so different. And then I went to study the medieval period, and I thought this feels a lot like my rural upbringing, the thick community bonds, the importance of religion and in binding it all together, really drew me to it. And so I wanted to understand more about what it is precisely about culture, and religion and culture in these two really different things, modern rural America and the medieval world.
This is amazing. I mean, from growing up on a ranch in Montana, I mean, you had
Yeah,
animals and like,
yeah.
then to Oxford. I mean, was it totally disorienting as a?
Yeah, I grew up doing cattle drives, on the back of a
That's so
horse.
cool. That's
Yeah.
so.
And then, to go to Oxford where yeah, everybody imagined that you wore like big 10-gallon hats or something like that. Um but yeah, it was really a culture shock in that sense. But the thing that I loved about it was the seriousness with which everybody was approaching their study. Again, I came from a family of people who love to study, who love to read, in spite of being out in the middle of the prairies. And
Mhm.
so I felt like at home, in the books.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's fantastic. So there as a senior, did you think you were going to pursue a life in academia, a graduate degree, kind of came
That
home and made that decision?
Yeah, that was the first time I thought, oh, I might want to do this for life. Like I might want to pursue this as a way of life. That was the first time I really, really started thinking about myself as having an intellectual life. Like I wasn't
Mhm.
just going to college, but I really wanted to deeply understand the why of things, and I wanted to continue to do that um, after I graduated from college. I wasn't, that was the first time the idea occurred to me, but I didn't pursue it right away. Actually, I went and I worked, several jobs to see, could I do this? But the love of learning really kept coming back to me, and so finally I went to the Catholic University of America to study medieval studies. In earnest, and to see, could I do this? Was I really cut out for this?
Tell us about
Um,
your dissertation.
Oh yeah. So after I finished my degree at Catholic University of America, I went up to the University of Toronto and studied at the center there. There is also the Pontifical Institute for Medieval Studies there, Etienne Gilson, and many famous Catholic thinkers taught there, Marshall McLuhan. And so there, I wanted to continue to pursue this question of the relationship between religion and culture. One of my heroes is Christopher Dawson. And
Hmm.
Christopher Dawson explores, how does religion influence culture, shape it, drive it, undergird it? But then it's not just a one-way relationship. Culture also influences how religion gets inflected,
Mm.
and so I wanted to study that. And my wonderful dissertation director was a man named Dr. Joe Gehring, may he rest in peace. And he said, well, why don't you look at indulgences? And I thought, well, that's odd. why would
Okay.
why
Okay.
would you want to
Uh-huh.
do that? But indulgences are important because they shape our mental furniture, particularly about how we think about sin and how we think about how we address the problem of sin. It also really drives home the communion of saints. So it just brings together a couple of ideas that really can form how people engage the church and different devotional practices in their own parishes. So yeah,
This is an interesting question.
yeah,
The church influencing culture and the culture influencing the church. And I've
yeah,
noodled on the question a lot, which I think is actually a parallel question of if kind of corporate America influences culture or if culture
yeah,
influences corporate America and which way the tide is stronger. Like, of course, they influence each, but
yeah.
which did you come to in terms of like, is there a way to parse out like maybe where?
Yeah. So the church often is responsive to needs. Certainly, it has its teachings and its doctrines, but those teachings and doctrines often develop in reaction to, mistaken ideas about, the nature of Christ or the nature of the church. Heresy usually drives the formation of doctrine, but doctrine, forms these really, sturdy goalposts that we get to play within. And oftentimes there are various needs in the community that rise up that the church addresses through different kinds of devotions, for instance, pilgrimage as an example of a response to popular need and desire to be close to the holy. um, and indulgences as well originate as, out of the bajillion wars that were fought in the Middle Ages. And you have really pious, kings and rulers who are going to war, but are also very worried about their souls. And so, how do I, what do I do? How can I, if I'm fighting for a righteous cause, what does that mean for my soul if I'm also you know, killing in the process of war. Indulgences arise out of this need to address these kinds of questions that were part of the culture. You know, it's a Germanic culture. Kings go to war, and so but again, how do you address the things that happen in the process of war, the sins that are committed in the process of war?
Yeah. Wow. Let's talk about Pope Leo the 14th.
Okay.
Um, yeah, the name, as I understand, I mean, we're at this
Yes.
inflection point in history. AI, everybody's talking about AI all day, every day,
Yes.
how it's changing the future of work.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is he took on this name in kind of reverence to Pope Leo the 13th, who's
Yeah.
one of the longest serving popes, I believe 25 years or so at the
Yeah.
end of the 19th
Mm-hmm.
century, and was kind of guiding the church and the world through the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
When I think about, and I'm interested in how kind of y'all are navigating this at Catholic International, then maybe this revolution we're in the midst of right now is maybe even bigger than the .com revolution, maybe bigger than the
Yes.
social media revolution. That in a matter of months, I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
many
Yeah.
people have been impacted so quickly
Yeah.
already. And I'd be interested in hearing kind of your thoughts about how this is going to impact academia and
Yeah.
the conversations you're having with the faculty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. As a historian, I'm generally resistant to making hot takes, and it feels like things are changing so fast that this feels like a hot take. But I think I can safely say this. When it comes to thinking about technology, every technology has the potential to do great good. But as I think a lot of us are worrying about, it also has a potential to cause great harm. And that's what we're worrying about right now is how is this going to completely refigure how we think about, education. Bill Gates went on Jimmy Fallon and said there are going to be no teachers. AI is going to replace all teachers, you know,
Gosh,
in 20 years
it's
or
crazy.
10
And,
in
and
10
it
years.
reflects his very impoverished vision for education.
Yes, yes.
Like,
But for those of us who really take education as formation seriously, and I think Bill Gates thinks of education as information.
yep,
That's his problem.
totally. Totally.
But
Yeah.
we think about it as a formation of a worldview, the formation
Yep.
of a person who can go forth in the world and understand the true and do the good. um, yeah, I think that AI certainly is going to pose challenges to, how we educate, practically speaking, technically speaking. But at the end of the day, there's still going to be a need for young men and women to come to understand the true, the good, and the beautiful, in order to be the kind of people that can shape the world for the true, the good, and the beautiful. Um, and that requires a kind of education that AI can never replace.
Is it possible that AI is actually going to kind of force the market in education in a way where it kind of forces folks to re-examine first principles
Yeah,
and and in some ways in a way that could potentially be a win for traditional classical
yeah.
education?
It forces the question, what are we doing?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like
yeah.
if it really is just information, then yeah, you know, tune up a chat bot and let her rip. But if it's something more than just information, there is always going to be the need for teachers who love the truth, teachers who love their students, and teachers who take seriously this business of the formation of the person. And so I don't see AI replacing traditional, liberal arts or classical education. Where I do see it having its biggest impact are in those places where education is merely viewed as information.
Tell us about Catholic International University. Some of our
Yeah,
guests maybe have never heard of it. Some may know a good bit already.
yeah.
When did y'all launch? How long has it been around?
Yeah, Catholic International has been around since the early 80s. It was, originally a pioneering long distance adult education in theology, certainly as a response to, the call by Pope John Paul II to to help educate the laity. And since then, it's developed into Catholic International University, where we don't just do theology, but we're also doing the liberal arts. We're also doing education. We're also moving into areas like the prudential use of technologies. We're also going to be developing programs in the future in counseling and in integral economic development, areas that the church identifies as a need.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to be developing different kinds of programs that, underwater basket weaving or anything like that. But we're really looking to serve the church, because that's what the university was originally founded to do, to help the church carry out her mission in education and in higher ed in particular. So we were one of the first universities to actually teach online before online courses became cool. We've been doing it since the
Since the
beginning.
did you say since the 80s?
Well, in the beginning, it was really done, through email and through correspondence, and when with the development of the internet, we were
Okay.
one of the first ones to move into the online use of the
So
online
I
space.
deal with students, but are there a lot of teachers who are teachers, but then also students at
Yeah,
Catholic International? Or?
yeah. So the school started out mainly offering MAs in theology, but now we offer MAs in theology and BAs as well as different kinds of certificates for those who want to work in the church in various capacities, catechists, folks who are working in youth ministry or in schools. We also have a master's in liberal arts education, and that's aimed at teachers and at school leaders to help them really develop their pedagogical skills in the case of teachers, to develop their leadership skills in the case of school leaders, but all based around a really thick sort of core curriculum that takes seriously the anthropology of the child, the deep
Hmm.
history of Catholic liberal education, and as well as the church's teachings on education as well.
And I discovered before we hit record here that you're at what I think is the most beautiful parish in America,
Yeah,
St. Paul's Cathedral in
yeah,
St. Paul, Minnesota.
yeah.
I think it's around 1910-ish. Is that right? That it was
That's
completed?
correct. Yeah, it was finished in the 1930s, and it was very much a labor of love by the people of St. Paul.
Yeah, and if you haven't been to this, I mean, it is incredible. It
Yeah,
rivals any European cathedral. It really does. But we see um, in some ways the story of Catholic education like mirrored
yeah.
in Catholic architecture.
hmm
And when things started to get weird in Catholic education, they got really weird in Catholic architecture as well,
Yeah,
as we've seen. And, the things that were weird and edgy are now just like, that doesn't work at all.
yeah,
And it seems like we may have hit rock bottom and that there's a new renaissance of orthodoxy that we're seeing. I mean, I think of just
right.
especially young people that are into the traditional Latin Mass, who go to more liturgical, Catholic Mass offerings.
hmm
And then also we're seeing this in where people are going to school, right?
That's right.
The
Yeah,
Newman Guide kind of colleges, are growing at the same time that many of the Catholic schools that kind of don't care a whole lot about Catholic identity are actually closing their doors, and sometimes in
right,
big numbers
right.
as well. Are we at the beginning of a revival?
I think so. I think, a couple of things. I think that the promises of like enlightenment or modern ideas about culture, about education, about art are kind of at a point of exhaustion. They've kind of run themselves out. And so we've kind of they've reached the end of the road. They've run
Yeah,
out of road,
yeah.
and so people are left wondering, well, now what's next? um, I think what's happening in Catholic education right now, this renewal, particularly in K-12 education, but also in higher ed, as you mentioned, amongst Newman Guide schools, is this resource month, this returning to what we've done before, but not to do it slavishly, I think, but to
Mhm.
draw inspiration from it, to bring it forward into the time where we now live. And this is that interplay between religion and culture, to bring it forward into the time that we now live and to adapt it to our particular needs now. And so I think we can think of the renewal of Catholic education as a returning to the sources, the medieval sources in my case, which I love very much,
Yeah.
but also to the ancient sources as well. There's a lot there that I think folks just never knew about. I mean, if you go to State U for your education, education begins in the late 19th century. There was no education before. You don't learn about it.
Yeah.
You don't learn about the Greeks and the Romans. You don't learn about the medievals, and you certainly don't learn about the rich heritage that is
Mhm.
there. So yeah, I think there's a real opportunity for us to help revive, renew, restore Catholic education by reaching out to its teachers and to its school leaders, and to encourage them to look afresh, look anew at what we've always done, what we've done before, and to look at how it's worked and how we can make it work in our own particular circumstances. Every school is unique. Every school has its own sort of culture, and we can take those
Mhm.
things, those principles and ideas from the past, and then think about how can we creatively bring them into our own situation, to bring something new, creative, and dynamic into our schools and into our communities.
I'm super eager to talk to you about books, and
Okay.
you're a historian.
Yes.
I'm wondering, when you think about the period that you have focused on historically,
Mm-hmm.
and a period where a small percentage of the population is literate, what
Yeah.
would you point to, though, as a couple of the works that were kind of most influential on culture in the areas of that you focus on?
Yeah, so the most influential texts, I think, for a culture that was barely literate, I think, were the what's called the Summa Confessorum, the handbooks for confessors, because it was in confession where you talked with your confessor, and he asked you very specific questions about how you live in the world, right? And based on who you were, your job, whether you were married. And he would ask you very specific questions about, how are you doing? How are you living as a merchant? Are you engaging in fraud? If you're married, how are you honoring the bond or not? And those were very formative for culture, forming ideas about marriage and family, forming ideas about justice in society and in the marketplace. So those, I think, were very formative texts. But in terms of education, there were a couple of texts, I think, that were very important. Um, well, the first being some of the old texts from ancient Rome, Marcianus, Capellanus, writing about the liberal arts, the Bible, of course. But then there were also a couple of French monks who were writing on the art of memory and how to help students in study and retain what it is they were learning. And they wrote about memory palaces, how to build out the architecture of your
Yeah.
student's mind, and help them, not only just remember what they're learning, but in the process, shape them. You're forming them
Mhm.
into a certain kind of person by putting certain kinds of texts before them and asking them to make it part of their mental furniture.
I read for the first time a couple years ago the abridged version of Gulag Archipelago,
Yeah, yeah,
and Solzhenitsyn, he couldn't write for long periods of time, but
hmm,
it was crazy how much he would basically write in his
yeah,
head, and the way he came up with like systems to organize. And
yeah,
it was like he'd written this massive work
yeah,
without putting it on paper.
right,
And our capacity for memorization. And I'm saying that this is a big part of a lot of the classical schools
right,
and their understanding of education's formation. You need to kind of
yeah,
ingest The good, the true, the beautiful.
You need to chew on it, and you really need to chew on it in order to make it a part of your mental furniture, the architecture of your mind. And this is where I think, to kind of get back to what we were talking about with technology in education. Um, Technology in education, it's kind of data in, data out. It doesn't
Yeah.
really become part of your mental furniture. It's just something you have to get through to get the grade and to move on. But in liberal arts, classical liberal arts, you're meant to like really ingest it and make it part of yourself in some really
Hmm.
deep way. It's and this makes me think about the role of memory and identity, how we think about who we are, what kind of person we are, what kind of people we are as a whole, and that's shaped by what we read and shaped by what we bring into our persons through the process of education. So, memory, I think, plays a really important role in building out, your person in the process of education.
The trademark question for the Anchored podcast has always
Okay.
been the single book that has been most formative for you, most influential for you. What would you say that is?
Oh my, that's a hard question. Um, the single most formative book that I've read.
Maybe
Well,
it's something that you reread a
yeah,
lot, or that is, yeah, you just continue to kind of noodle over and.
Yeah. Well, I've returned to again and again two books, mainly because I teach them, if not several times a year, at least once a year, and every time I'm struck anew by them. The first one is Joseph Pieper's Leisure: The Basis of Culture,
Mhm.
and helping us to understand um, how it is that study and contemplation actually form culture, and so and that there is this relationship between what I do and the culture. I am
Mhm.
not powerless in shaping the culture. When I make the choice to be the kind of person who contemplates, the kind of person who builds a family, that reads, that prays, that that contemplates the true, the good, and the beautiful, I create a culture that does that.
Mhm.
So Pieper's book is really important, and I think too, C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man. I also teach it every year as
Well, do
well.
you really? Oh,
Yes,
wow.
and so
Okay.
that about building up the moral capacities of a young
Yeah.
person. So as a teacher, I think those are some of my most formative
We
texts.
we do at CLT. We read a book out loud together every quarter. And we spend
Mm-hmm.
like 40 minutes every Monday morning reading out loud. We just did
Yeah,
Abolition of Man
yeah.
not long ago. I'm wondering. I mean, I'm thinking about what you're saying about Pieper and the leisure as the basis of culture. And we're at this moment where the big social media companies. I heard it put this way, that like attention is the new oil.
Yeah.
And it's the resource everyone is in competition for.
Yes.
And it's the only way that these big tech companies just continue to grow in scale, is by mining. um
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it to get kids to enter into the life of the mind, to understand contemplation? Is it mission impossible? How would you advise teachers that are listening to this podcast who want to impart this to their students? I mean, how do they do
Mm.
that in this moment?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a real challenge that also involves engaging parents on this question, which I know is hard for schools to do, but I think it's an important conversation to continue to raise with parents, um, to help them start to think about their child's attention as a resource that is being wasted. I think a lot of parents probably don't think about social media in those particular ways. So I think it's a conversation that we have to have with parents to support what teachers are doing in the classroom. And I think it's this. Certainly you have to have policies in place that limit the use of screens in schools and in classrooms, and help students know exactly what they ought to be used for, because this is really a question ultimately of virtue. It's certainly, knowledge helps, knowing what's happening, understanding what's happening, particularly at the high school level, um, I think is important. But how do you to really think carefully? How can I help a student internalize this and make it a habit? make it a virtue. Talk about temperance. Talk about attention as a virtue as well. That it's something that needs to be developed, that it's something that needs to be protected, and that it's something that if we don't guard it, can also impact our spiritual life as well. Because, you're constantly swimming in the shallows. If you want to be a shallow person, swim in the shallows. If you want to be a person capable of depth and wisdom, then you're going to have to shut it off.
Yeah.
And so to contemplate the deeper things, the higher things, to go deep, to go high, you've got to get out of the shallows.
Yeah.
um,
That's a great
and
way to put it.
and to help, particularly our high schoolers understand that, and their families as well.
So, and I can tell you, I know firsthand, there are actually a lot of colleges and universities out there where they'll say, we've got a lot of great things going here, but
Yeah.
our education department is not necessarily one of those.
Mm.
I am so grateful that you're the chair at Catholic International University for
Thanks.
education there,
Yeah.
and just your vision is beautiful, so inspiring. And how do folks learn more if they want to pursue a master's or degree at Catholic International?
Yeah, well, you can start by Googling Catholic International University. And you can also friend us. We've got a wonderful young marketing associate who knows everything about social media. So if you've got that, there's lots of new information, videos, podcast links, and things like that that are up on those channels. But the website really tells you a lot. And you can see all of the classes you would take. You can read more about the vision behind it, and what it is that you would be immersing yourself in should you join us in the journey in the Master's in Liberal Arts Education.
Awesome. Love that. Again, we're here with Ann Brodeur, who's the chair of education at Catholic International University. And thank you so much for coming on the Anchor podcast. Definitely come back in the future and join us again.
All right, lovely to be with you.